Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to present today. My name is Shanna Devine. I'm the director of the Office of the Whistleblower Ombuds. I do wish I could be there with you in person due to some health reasons. I had to participate virtually, but I continue to be grateful for Zoom. And I am looking forward to participating in the Q&A after this presentation through the Slack channel. So to get started here, I just wanted to provide an overview. I am going to be going through the ways in which our office advises the House of Representatives on best practices when working with whistleblowers who come forward from the public and the private sectors. This may be constituents looking for support against retaliation, and maybe potential oversight sources reaching out to the correct committee. Myriad of circumstances. But I'm also going to touch on the ways in which ways in which whistleblowers can take precautions on their end to protect their communications when they're working with Congress. So with that, I want to start by looking at a recent example of Congress's partnership with a key whistleblower that I'm sure this community is familiar with. Before you is an excerpt from Twitter's former chief security officer, who goes by Mudge. In testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee just last September, he stated, "I'm here today because Twitter's leadership is misleading the public, lawmakers, regulators, and even its own board of directors. What I discovered when I joined Twitter was that this enormously influential company was over a decade behind industry security standards. The company's cybersecurity failure makes it vulnerable to exploitation, causing real harm to real people." Now, again, I'm sure this audience is familiar with Mudge's whistleblowing. But what's so powerful is that his disclosures gripped everyday consumers, right, including those users who are directly impacted by these security failures, those real people he referred to. And he strategically turned his knowledge into power by sharing it with everyone in society who should be benefiting from his disclosures, from Congress to the public. Now, throughout history, Congress has relied on whistleblowers to conduct effective oversight. But Congress has also lacked clear guidelines for how to safely and effectively work with these individuals, which unfortunately has at times led to unintentional harm. That's where our office comes in. We were established in the 116th Congress as an independent and nonpartisan support office within the House of Representatives. We're under the jurisdiction of the Committee on House Administration. Now, collectively, our team of 3 has about 35 years of experience really working across the aisle to support Congress's work with whistleblowers. One of our team members, John Whitty, also has unique background in network engineering and technical security, and you'll see that play out in our guidance. Our primary function is to advise House offices on best practices when they're working with whistleblowers from both the public and the private sectors. 2 points of clarification. 1, we don't have a Senate counterpart. We're just House-facing. And 2, we don't have the authority to receive disclosures from whistleblowers. But there are ways in which we can provide guiding resources that are publicly available on our website, and I'll go into that further. Now, briefly, our services include trainings on best practices. In addition, we can help offices to further develop their intake procedures when working with whistleblowers. We can share confidential consultations with them to assist staff when they're responding to individual whistleblower inquiries they may receive. And we can also provide technical expertise around whistleblower legislation. So most of our trainings really start with educating Congress on how to identify a whistleblower matter in the first place and the additional precautions required. So in broad terms, we describe whistleblowers as individuals disclosing abuses of power that betray the public trust. These individuals commonly reach out to their member office or the relevant committee of jurisdiction. And what we do is help to coach offices on some of those key distinctions from traditional casework and witness work. Right? As we touched on, this includes the role that whistleblowers can play in helping to advance oversight, but also unique confidentiality requirements, as well as the risks that whistleblowers take when coming forward. Now, nearly all whistleblower statutes do protect communications with Congress, but the strength of those rights varies across sectors, and our office helps the House to navigate what those complexities are. Now, Let's take a moment to look at why whistleblowers come forward. Frankly, the reality is that most don't intend to become whistleblowers. I mean, this is probably the most difficult decision they're going to make throughout their career. And more often than not, they don't feel it is a decision. As we saw with Mudge's whistleblowing, they're usually simply trying to protect their organization's mission, or they think they're simply doing their job. And frankly, for that reason, many may not even identify with the label whistleblower when they reach out. In fact, executive branch employees are actually required to disclose waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption to the appropriate authorities. Now, before they know it, whistleblowers commonly find themselves at a professional crossroads, right? Dealing with different threats and pressures they never anticipated. It's not unusual for them to experience gaslighting, start to question their own reality or the evidence they're bringing forward. Commonly, they're pushed out of their chosen career field, or even treated as if they've committed a crime for exposing some type of crime. Two examples come to mind. These were both shortly after the 9/11 attacks within the US. So let's take the first example of a former NSA contractor, Edward Loomis. Now, he reported government waste on an ineffective and illegal domestic surveillance program. And he reported this up the proper chain of command. And after he came forward, he himself became the target of a retaliatory criminal investigation that ultimately cost him his career. His colleague, Thomas Drake, he was threatened with 35 years in prison under the Espionage Act after he legally provided an unclassified briefing on the surveillance program to a reporter that he had worked with. Now, the reality is, whistleblowers come forward at significant risk to themselves. That said, we like to ask staff why they feel the primary reason is that potential whistleblowers ultimately don't come forward. Any thoughts on your ends as well? Just take a moment to think about it. Now, interestingly enough, research has found that number one reason potential whistleblowers don't come forward is this fear of futility, a fear that their disclosures won't have an impact and won't make a difference, and therefore they're not worth the risk. And that risk is the second primary reason they don't come forward, the fear of retaliation. That said, those who do speak up, they're trying to sort out a critical life's choice by working effectively with Congress. And for them to take that step, they need to have confidence in the process. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce some foundational principles that we share with House offices to keep in mind when they're working with whistleblowers. These are largely grounded in establishing trust. So the first rule of thumb before you is do no harm, right? Ideally, an office wants an individual to be better off after they contact them, but certainly not worse off. And it's important they move forward cautiously. So they can start by establishing ground rules with the whistleblower around how they're going to work with their information. This can help avoid any surprises and also help to ensure that they're maintaining their desired level of confidentiality, which they should discuss early on. Next, to manage expectations, offices, we advise, should clearly communicate the limits around what they can and cannot do. For instance, Congress can't provide legal advice to a whistleblower, but they should provide some guiding resources to help orient the whistleblower early in their process. This may include a menu of whistleblower support organizations that we've made public on our website. Now, to the extent an office makes a commitment, we stress the importance of them trying to honor it, right? This may be something as basic as sticking with a deadline they've committed to something more substantive, like sending that follow-up letter to the OIG to try and get movement on a retaliation investigation. Now, all of these acts are going to help build confidence in that working relationship moving forward. Next, partnering on oversight is such a key one. As the experts, whistleblowers can be incredible allies at that follow-up stage. And they're eager to be put to work, right? That's why they're coming forward. They want to have an impact. So some examples we provide offices are, rather than asking the whistleblower for the documents directly, ask them for a roadmap of documents that the congressional offices can then request from the employer. At the same time, they need to be careful not to provide too specific a level of document requests that could be traced back to the source, and we'll go into that further. Next, offices can ask the whistleblowers if they have colleagues who are willing to corroborate their concerns. And of course, this will help expand the office's body of evidence. But it's also a lot more difficult for an employer to discredit one individual versus maybe half a dozen witnesses. We really stress that solidarity is key to survival within the whistleblowing field. Now, again, in terms of the whistleblower's expertise, they can help to prep questions for a hearing or maybe an oversight letter that an office is sending as a result of their disclosures. They can also brainstorm corrective action and policy solutions. The list goes on. There's endless amounts of creativity when it comes to partnering on oversight. But let me wrap up on principles with stressing that arguably nothing is more important than an office standing by its sources. And we stress that members who develop those strong reputations become magnets for future whistleblowers. Of course, the goal is to prevent retaliation, but when that's not possible, congressional offices have powerful tools at their disposal to hold retaliators accountable. For instance, there's a law that allows Congress to cut off the salary of an employee within the federal government who has tried to gag a whistleblower from lawfully communicating with Congress. And there are a number of other tools too, and we're available to coach offices on how to utilize them. Now, we have developed desk guides as well as templates to help facilitate the House's work with whistleblowers. This includes everything from mitigating risks during that initial intake stage to safely partnering on oversight. And these resources are largely public on our website. So our latest model resource, our sample whistleblower confidentiality policy, is especially relevant and timely for this audience. It reflects both those ground rules that I started to preview, as well as our information security best practices. So I'm just going to take a moment to highlight some of the guidance within that policy. Now, as an office collects information from whistleblowers, they should advise them of, first and foremost, their right to confidentiality under the House Code of Conduct. This was a recent development in the last Congress that the current Congress maintained, notably, and it prohibits the House from publicly identifying a protected whistleblower without their advance written consent. And we have guidelines for compliance with that. The second rule of thumb here is let the whistleblower know that they have the right to the integrity and security of the information to be adequately protected. Again, they have the right to have their information adequately protected. So for instance, information should only be shared and stored through secure official House accounts. Doing this will largely help to trigger protections under the speech and debate clause. In addition, the House should limit access to the information on a need-to-know basis. That can be critical to that information control. Next, the whistleblower has the right to review the information in advance of its use by an office. Right? This is both for quality control, to make sure that the congressional office's record is accurate, but also for confidentiality concerns. But we like to stress that the facts alone can be a whistleblower's signature. So it's important that the office partner with the whistleblower in advance of acting on their information to make sure that they're accurately capturing those underlying disclosures and concerns, while at the same time camouflaging the whistleblower as the source of the information. Now, this also includes screening the information for metadata, right? Such as maybe an IP address or watermarks. Now, this is critical to avoid what happened, for instance, with Reality Winner. Some of you may recall that her anonymity was compromised after she provided documentation around the Russian interference in US elections. Now, at the same time, there are strategic actions that the whistleblower and Congress can take to mitigate that level of risk. Now, lastly, we stress the importance of letting the whistleblower know they have the right to object to the use including sharing of their information. That is, a congressional office will first obtain their consent before sharing it further. Now, at the same time, while we have these ground rules, we still caution the importance of offices not overpromising the level of confidentiality that they can provide a whistleblower. The reality is, as this community knows, you can never guarantee confidentiality due to factors that may be beyond any individual's control, right? Such as the state of surveillance technology, as well as legal limitations. For that reason, it's important that whistleblowers also take precautions on their end to protect their communications with Congress. Now, before you use a menu of whistleblower survival tips, these have been informed by experts who have worked with thousands of whistleblowers to share their lessons learned. And frankly, these can help whistleblowers largely protect themselves while still having an impact. Now, I'm not going to go into these in depth. I understand that Emily Schwartz has an excellent related presentation scheduled next on communication do's and don'ts for whistleblowers. But just to give you a flavor of our guidance, some of the things we stress the congressional office share with the whistleblower for them to keep in mind are seeking experienced legal counsel as early as possible in their process, right? And making a plan with the counsel for how to safely proceed. Now, for the whistleblower, when they're communicating with Congress, they may want to consider meeting in person in a discrete location. And certainly, if they're going to communicate digitally, use encrypted communication platforms that can't be monitored by their employer, right? Maybe something like the Signal or Wicker apps. And then likewise, the congressional office should be using these on their end as well for that end-to-end encryption. Of course, they can also think of alternative channels to share their evidence, maybe through their attorney or another trusted entity that can serve as a buffer and help to reduce that paper trail. Again, this is where whistleblowers can coach offices on how to obtain documentation directly from the employer, but making sure to broaden that information kind of request so that it's not so specific that it could be traced back to a whistleblower if, say, they're one of half a dozen employees who knows where the documents may exist and knows where to find them. So a little bit of strategy that goes into that approach working effectively. Now, as part of our commitment to transparency around operations, but our survival tips and frankly, nearly all of our resources are publicly accessible on our website, which can be accessed at whistleblower.house.gov. Now, it is organized by these two key categories, congressional audience and whistleblower audience. Just as a preview for this Congress, one of our goals is to have at least one staff within each member and committee office certified in our new Working with Whistleblowers curriculum, which is previewed on your screen. Now, although the QR codes are only accessible to congressional staff within the House, most of our videos are publicly available via our website, so feel free to peruse them if they're of interest. Now, in closing, I did just want to share with you our vision and take a moment to reflect on that and how we're working toward advancing it each day. Now, our vision before you is to institutionalize really best practices for Congress's work with whistleblowers. This includes safe, effective, and consistent practices. This is all in furtherance of Congress's Article 1 oversight and constituent responsibilities. We realize this is a fairly ambitious vision, given that engagement with our office is voluntary. But frankly, engagement today demonstrates that there's a demand for our guidance. Now, just as a preview, our annual report from 2022 is about to be released publicly on our website. And we found that in the 117th Congress, about 2/3 of all House member offices, as well as committees, utilized our services. So we're hoping there's more to come in the 118th Congress. With that, I'll go ahead and wrap it up. I just want to thank, again, Joe, Melanie, and really everyone who worked behind the scenes to organize this important gathering. And I'm looking forward to addressing any questions you may have in that Slack channel. In addition, don't hesitate to reach out to our office directly if we can be of service. Our contact information is on your screen. And I look forward to further communications. Thanks so much.